You've probably heard smoking is a modern habit, a bad one we invented somewhere in the last few centuries. That's wrong. Not slightly wrong. Wrong by tens of thousands of years. Long before cigarettes, before tobacco was ever cultivated, humans were already deliberately inhaling smoke into their lungs. On purpose. Repeatedly. And the reason why is stranger than you think. Let's go. Here's the real question buried inside all of this. When did humans first start pulling smoke into their lungs? And was it always a choice? Because the honest answer splits into two very different stories happening on two very different timelines, and most people have never heard either one. The first story isn't really about smoking at all. It's about something humans never chose, but couldn't avoid. The moment our ancestors figured out how to keep a fire burning inside an enclosed space, a cave, a hut, a rock shelter, they signed up for something they didn't understand yet. Chronic, daily, lifelong smoke exposure. Not a cigarette here and there. Hour after hour, night after night, for an entire lifetime, starting in infancy. Researchers studying a site called Qesem Cave in Israel found something remarkable buried in the dental calculus. The hardened plaque of teeth belonging to humans who lived there roughly 300,000 years ago. Microscopic particles of smoke and ash embedded directly in the tartar, not from a fire nearby. From smoke they were breathing in so consistently it fossilized in their teeth. A similar pattern shows up at El Sidron Cave in Spain in Neanderthal remains. This wasn't an occasional inconvenience. It was baseline biology for anyone living around a hearth. And it gets more specific than that. A team at Tel Aviv University built a full smoke dispersal simulation for a 170,000-year-old cave site and discovered something that should genuinely surprise you. The hearth wasn't placed randomly. It was positioned in almost the exact spot that minimized smoke exposure across the whole cave, without any instruments, without any understanding of particulate matter, just trial and error passed down across generations. Early humans were running informal air quality engineering hundreds of thousands of years before anyone had a word for air quality. Here's the uncomfortable part. It didn't work well enough. Anthropologists have found soot-blackened lung tissue, a condition called anthracosis, preserved in mummified remains across completely unrelated cultures. Ötzi the Iceman, dead around 3,300 BCE, had lungs blackened from decades of fire smoke, along with early signs of what looks like COPD in his 20s. Egyptian mummies show the same thing. A mummy known as Hanut had lung tissue consistent with emphysema and anthracosis from long-term smoke inhalation. Another, Harmos, had lungs so damaged that fragments of tissue reportedly floated in water, a classic sign of advanced lung disease. These weren't smokers in the way we use that word. They never touched tobacco. They just lived near fire, which for most of human history was not optional. And this wasn't a fringe problem affecting a few unlucky people. The World Health Organization estimates that indoor smoke from open fires still kills around 2 million people a year today, in places where cooking over an open flame indoors remains standard practice. That's not an ancient statistic. That's happening right now, which means the story of accidental human smoke exposure isn't even finished. It's still being written in real time, just somewhere else. So if you're keeping score, the first kind of smoking wasn't a habit humans picked up. It was a tax. The price of warmth, of cooked food, of light in the dark, of every advantage fire gave our species. You couldn't have one without the other. Every early human who ever sat close enough to a fire to feel its warmth was also close enough to breathe its damage. There was no version of controlling fire that didn't come bundled with this cost. Now here's where the story splits. And this is the part almost nobody expects, because separately from all of that involuntary exposure, Humans also started smoking things on purpose, deliberately, specifically for the effect it produced. And that story is completely different, driven by completely different motives. The oldest confirmed evidence for deliberate tobacco use comes from a site called Wishbone in the North American Desert West, where researchers found tobacco residue dating back roughly 12,300 years. That pushed the known timeline for tobacco use back 9,000 years earlier than anyone had previously documented, 12,300 years ago, before agriculture, before permanent settlements, before writing, wheels, or metal tools of any kind. Someone had already identified a specific plant, understood what it did to the body, and built it into daily life. Cannabis tells an even stranger version of the same story. Archaeologists working at a site called Jirzankal Cemetery, high in the Pamir Plateau in western China, found wooden braziers, small burners placed inside tombs, dated to around 500 BCE. When researchers analyzed the burnt residue, they found cannabinol, a byproduct of THC, at levels far higher than you'd find in a wild, untended plant. That's the detail that matters. It means these weren't people accidentally burning random hemp. They were either actively cultivating stronger plants or specifically seeking them out in the wild, selecting for potency, understanding exactly what effect they wanted, and engineering their way toward it. 2,500 years ago, at a funeral, there's a wilder confirmation of this same behavior sitting in, of all places, ancient Greek writing. The historian Herodotus described the Scythians, a nomadic people north of the Black Sea, throwing hemp seeds onto red-hot stones inside small enclosed tents, deliberately generating a thick vapor they'd sit inside and inhale. He wrote that they shouted with pleasure at the effect. That's not archaeological residue. That's a direct written eyewitness account of people getting intentionally high on smoke roughly 2,400 years ago, described with the same casual specificity you'd use to describe a sauna. So here's the actual mind-bending part, the layer most people miss completely. Humans didn't stumble into smoking as one single habit at one single point in history. We ran two entirely separate, overlapping relationships with smoke for tens of thousands of years simultaneously. One we never chose and couldn't escape, generation after generation, breathing hearth smoke as an unavoidable cost of survival. And one we actively pursued, sought out, refined, and selected for purely for the effect it had on the mind. Damage we tolerated because we had no alternative, sitting right alongside a substance we deliberately cultivated because we wanted exactly what it did to us. Both were already ancient before recorded history even started paying attention. And there's a reason your body can even process either version of this in the first place. Human lungs, it turns out, are unusually resilient organs built with redundant airways, self-clearing mucus systems, and repair mechanisms that can handle a genuinely surprising amount of particulate damage before failing outright. Some researchers studying this call it a paradox. If lungs are this tough, why does modern smoking still kill so many people? Part of the answer is survivorship. For hundreds of thousands of years, the humans who could tolerate heavy chronic smoke exposure without dying young were the ones who kept reproducing near the fire that kept their children warm. That resilience isn't an accident. It's inherited. It's a trait selected for by exactly the environment we're discussing, which means the discomfort you might feel walking into a smoky room, or the way your lungs still ache after being near a bonfire too long. That's not your body malfunctioning. That's an incredibly old, incredibly specific piece of biological infrastructure doing exactly what it was built to do, forged by hundreds of thousands of years spent living close enough to fire to survive, and just far enough away to barely get away with it. We didn't invent smoking. We inherited it twice over from two completely different directions long before anyone thought to name either one.